Welcome to Season 4 of the Art of Teaching podcast. I'm Matthew Green and I'm so grateful that you joined me today. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to all of you that have subscribed, listened and reviewed the episodes. I really do appreciate you taking the time. Professor Stephen Fogarty is President of Alphacrucis College, a self-accrediting higher educational provider and the National Training College for Australian Christian Churches. He has held this position since 1999. His role involves providing leadership to the academic and administrative staff and students of the college and representing the college to its various constituencies. His research explores transformational leadership and the relationship between leader and follower motivation. In our wide-ranging discussion, we talked about how he defines transformational leadership, how the leadership landscape has changed over the last decade, and what the current COVID-19 pandemic has taught us about effective leadership. I hope that you get as much out of this discussion as I did. Professor Stephen Fogarty, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. Where are you phoning from?
I'm in Palm Cove in North Queensland.
Beautiful.
Yep, it is.
Lovely part of the world.
Hmm.
And you mentioned that you had done a number of interviews already today, so thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, my privilege, Matthew. It's a delight to be with you.
Thank you so much. Probably the most important question of the interview, what is your coffee order?
It's a skim piccolo.
Fantastic. Straight to the point.
Skim piccolo in the morning, but if it's the end of a dinner meal, it's an espresso, short black.
And so you would have coffee in the evening. That doesn't keep you up?
No, I can have a coffee and go to sleep immediately after I've drunk it. So.
That's amazing. I'm interested. You could have a dinner party with anybody, obviously excluding your family. They are invited. Who would be there and why?
Yeah, well, obviously, as a Christian, it'd be great to have Jesus there, but let's leave him out for the moment. I'd love to have the Apostle Paul there. That would be fascinating.
Right.
And, I reckon St. Augustine would be interesting.
Amazing.
Probably Martin Luther.
Yeah.
And James Joyce. Throw in someone quite different, fascinating thinker and novelist of the early 20th century, who was Irish. And of course, Irish is my heritage. So, so I have an affinity with James Joyce.
It sounds like a wonderful dinner party. It'd be a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know whether they would get on with each other. Luther will argue with anybody. He'll dispute anybody.
Yeah.
Augustine is so complex in his thinking, I don't know whether you would understand him. James Joyce might be obtuse. And Paul is such a determined, forceful character. So what a meeting. I should have some women there as well to balance them out. But if I'm being completely honest with you, they're the characters that would intrigue me most in history at this point.
Amazing. I mean, it sounds like a fascinating dinner. I would love to be a fly on the wall in those conversations. I'm just interested, Stephen, what was your upbringing like, and what's your history been in education so far?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Perth. In fact, I grew up initially in a country town in the southwest of Western Australia called Collie, but then mostly in Perth. Right through the Catholic education system. We went to Catholic church right up until almost the time that I was converted and started attending a Pentecostal church. My parents put me through private schools. I went to a GPS, so one of the expensive private schools in Perth. So a really good education and a very stable childhood. I value my upbringing. We had my parents' 50th anniversary several years ago, and I think it was I who made the comment that any of us children who've gone astray, it's our own fault. We can't blame our parents because they did everything they could to give us a stable and a loving, I think,
amazing
home environment. Yeah, so I'm very thankful for.
Amazing. It sounds like you had a wonderful upbringing, so much to be grateful and thankful for your parents.
Yeah. One of the surprises I found in pastoral ministry was running across people who had dysfunctional upbringings, and really couldn't quite ever understand it fully. So, so a slight disadvantage in the counselling situation. Yeah.
Wow. Well, my understanding, Stephen, is that your PhD was in organisational leadership. What were some of your findings, and why was that an area that you were so interested in?
Yeah, there's this age-old discussion in church circles about whether leadership's important or not, and particularly in the type of church circles that I'm connected with, there's a strong emphasis on, God moving in our midst. The Holy Spirit is often quoted, and so sometimes there's an idea that if one prays enough and one cares enough and one's spiritual enough, then everything will go right. But over time, as I looked, and I just came to the conclusion that leadership is absolutely critical in church contexts, and of course, and every other context as well, but certainly in church context. And so I thought, well, what is it that's necessary to be an effective leader in church or in a not-for-profit, anywhere where you've got lots of people who give them their time, their effort voluntarily, or at lower pay than they might get in a more professional setting. So what do you have to do to get the best out of those people? So that's what drove me, that idea. What type of leadership essentially brings out the best in people? If you want me to be technical, what type of leadership inspires intrinsic motivation, strong internal drives within people? And my conclusion, of course, is that all church leadership has to be inspirational. In my PhD, I use the word transformational, but in a sense, it's a synonym for inspirational. You can't just manage a church. You can't just manage a not-for-profit organisation. It'll do okay, but it probably won't achieve its potential. It won't grow, expand, exert influence across the community. How do you do that? You've got to find a way to evoke a strong emotional response from other people. And so I think that church leadership must be transformational, because the whole point of church leadership is inspiring others to sort of rise above their normal interests, which are important interests, is, family and work, and well, they're important things, but to rise above that and see something more important, which in Christian context is always the gospel and its potential.
So important. I did a Masters of Instructional Leadership through the University of Melbourne, and what was really, really interesting is I have had experience working in volunteering in the not-for-profit sector, and also working for a government organisation. And so really looking at some of the evidence that supports the impact of transformational leadership was absolutely fascinating. And it's not just about this hype of getting people excited. It's actually such an important component of leadership, and really doing things with substance and drawing people towards a common goal is so essential. And I think it was really interesting for me to see some of the research and the evidence base behind transformational leadership. I thought was absolutely fascinating. I'm really interested, Stephen, how on earth you find time to run marathons, attend symphonies, follow the Sydney Swans, and also read literature, because the last conversation that I had with you a number of months ago, you are my running inspiration. Really did encourage me to put the shoes on and go for a run. But I struggle with time and prioritization just like everybody else. How on earth do you find the time to do all of those things?
Yeah, well, it's purely, as you said, it's prioritisation. And I pretty well organise my life very, very carefully, Matthew. So I'm out for a run at 6 a.m. in the morning. If I'm out for a long run, I'm out at 5 a.m. in the morning. And I love doing that. It's not a burden for me to get up early and go out. So I do that. With regard to the Symphony and the Swans, well, basically I just subscribe to the Symphony, take a membership of the Swans, put those things in the calendar and get to as many as I can. We tend to do the Symphony midweek now. We used to do it on weekends, but we tend to go Wednesday, Thursday nights now, because it allows you to do the other things. With the reading, I've got a fairly disciplined life in that regard. I have a structured devotional life. I've got a standard way of going through the 365 days of the year with a devotional plan. I've been doing the same plan since 1985, so I just keep going over it year after year after year. And really, I give myself a minimum of half an hour to that. So basically, there's half an hour. That's all I'm going to do. Nothing else is going to get in the way of that. And I do the same thing with reading. And with reading literature, essentially I've got a reading plan. I try to read the Western canon over 10 years, which means every year I go back to the Greeks and, a sort of a selected set of readings all the way through to the early 20th century.
Wow.
Then go back to the Greeks and go through. So it's interesting, fascinating reading. Yeah, so essentially I'm very structured. If you take structure away from me, then I get really agitated. I can't work in an unstructured environment. Yeah.
Well, I'm even more grateful then that you would take this call today. I hope that it's not interrupting too much. So very, very grateful. So why do you think it's important to do things outside of your professional career? I mean, you obviously have a vibrant professional career. You it seems like you have a lot on your plate, but why is it important to do these things that stimulate you outside of your careire?
Yeah, look, so you don't get bored and so you don't become boring in a very, very short term. One of the problems with long-term leadership is that you just become set in your ways, you repeat the same old mantra, people know what to expect from you, and that's counterproductive to your influences of leadership. They've got to see something fresh and something that excites you. So you've got to find things that create joy and spark interest in you. Yes. And you just can't do the same thing for a long period of time and maintain that unless there are external inputs. Yeah. You've also got to walk out of your work context pretty often, and I do that. Like this morning, I've just finished reading the Iliad, so I've just read the ultimate scene where Achilles kills Hector outside the walls of Troy, the great city, and so it's just fabulous. And you go and you live in a completely different world, this world of Greek mythology, and it's interesting, it's exciting, it's different to everything else. But I come back out of this with a little bit of inspiration, enthusiasm, some fresh energy. So I need that, so I don't get bored with my job. And any time a leader gets bored with their job, you can guarantee that you're boring to everyone else. You can guarantee that your motivational potential is on the decline. You've got to do it. Now, read literature, go to the symphony if you like, follow the swans if you want to. I've also done plenty of short courses over the years, and I'll keep doing them all over the place. So the last one I did was at Cambridge University. I can't remember what it's called now, something about being a heroic leader or something. That was just really good. It says almost nothing new there, but a different juxtaposition of materials. And that'll give me 6 months or 9 months or 12 months worth of energy to keep going. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I find that fascinating, Stephen, to hear all of these things that you're engaged with and involved in outside of your profession. I think is so important, and it's really wonderful to hear just how that seems to be having such a positive impact in what you do and what you're involved in. Do you think it's important as a leader to remain continually curious and ask questions and read outside of your comfort zone? Has that been an important thing for you?
Yeah, I think it's critical. If you go back, Matthew, to your earlier comments about transformational leadership, you'll know that in the most typical characterisation of transformational leadership, they talk about sort of 4 quadrants of behaviour, if you like, or 4 sets of behaviours. And the third one is something called intellectual stimulation.
Yes.
And really, it is the capacity of a leader to inspire creativity, ingenuity, problem-solving skills in those who you work with or those who cooperate with you. And, you can come up with all sorts of formal mechanisms to do that. But the reality is the most powerful mechanism is the fact that you're curious and you ask questions and you bring fresh insights. And so they see that in you, and that inspires the same type of behaviour in others. In fact, I think leaders either license or prohibit creativity in those around and about them. Wow. And you've just got to have that spark within you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it would be amiss of me, Stephen, not to ask about how you think the current COVID-19 pandemic has impacted leadership, and what are some of the things that has taught us about the essential qualities of leadership?
Yeah, well, it's in its initial phase, it's classic crisis leadership. And crisis leadership, in a sense, depends upon your prior preparation. You would have heard many times that leadership begins with a vision, and we all believe that. So to manage a crisis, to go through anything where the pressure is on suddenly more than normal, the leader and the leaders, those who are exerting influence in the organisation, really got to maintain consistency of practice, of focus, of vision, if you like. So where's the horizon to which we are moving at this point in time? You'd also connect that to the notion of mission. You've really got to know why you're doing this. It's easy to keep doing something if you're just making good money and things are good. But when there's pressure on and maybe it's harder, there are much more difficult decisions to be made, then there's got to be a strong sense of raison d'etre. This is what we're connected to. So I think it really demonstrates to any leader in any organisation the strength of their commitment to vision, perhaps even to values. And then once you get into the crisis, of course, what do people want in a crisis? They want confident leadership. They don't necessarily want dictatorial leadership, but they want the leader at least to exude confidence, capacity, optimism, enthusiasm, to believe that, yes, we will get through this, or to use the famous words of previous President of the United States, to say, yes, we can. So I think they're the critical factors. Don't do anything panicky. Don't make any major changes. Stay consistent. Stay true to your course, and convey to those working with you, those who are relying upon you, that look, it's rocky at the moment. It's awkward. There are all sorts of pressures. If we can keep doing what we're doing to the best of our capacity, in all likelihood, we'll ride this storm out, and we'll find calm waters on the other side. Well, that's leadership in a crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. And you may or may not know, I work with really young children, so I have to take these really sort of complex and abstract ideas and make them simple for young people to understand. If you were explaining the term leadership to a group of school children, how would you define it?
School users say we need to cooperate to make the world a better place. Things can be better than they are at the moment. Whether it's school or sport or our community, there are better things. And why don't we think about something better, a better way of doing this? And when we thought about that better way of doing this, well, how would we go about enacting or achieving that better way? Well, if we all talk and agree upon a way and decide to cooperate, decide to put a bit of energy in together, then we can start to change things a little bit and even change ourselves a little bit, the way we relate to one another a little bit, and we can make this thing better than it is. That's the way I would go about it. I think I'd be a bit more prepared and have a couple more helpful stories. But in the end, if you think about what I'm saying is that leadership is influence exerted within relationships. And that would be my basic thesis. Leadership is influence exerted within relationships, and put that in the appropriate language for the audience you're talking to.
Yeah, and I think that's so important to that you highlighted on that term relationships, and maybe something which is maybe more prevalent in more modern definitions of leadership, because it's not just about authority and getting people to do what you want them to do. It's actually about building that trust and building that real servant leadership, I think, is absolutely essential. I mean, you've written extensively, Stephen, about whether it be in the Fogarty lectures or the role of metaphor and organisation and management theory, and I encourage everybody to really check those out. But how on earth can we sort of begin to understand the effectiveness of an organisation? How can we analyse organisations to find out exactly what is going on? I'm aware that is an incredibly broad question.
It is, yeah. Look, there are a number of criteria. There's very objective criteria, aren't there?
Yeah.
In any organisation, number one needs to remain financially viable. So
right.
You've got the very objective financial criteria. Number two, any organisation has a set of defined outcomes.
Yes.
If it's producing a product or producing an experience or offering something like an education, there are defined outcomes. And so customer satisfaction tells you how you are going in achieving those outcomes. I obviously run an educational institution. It's a heavily regulated industry. there are prescribed standards for doing everything. But the most important thing for me is that we have student satisfaction surveys, student exit surveys, student destination surveys, and we compared across an industry. And it's always fabulous to read that our students and our graduates rate us much more highly than nearly every other higher education institution in the country. So you've got those sets of criteria. And then come internally, I mentioned vision, mission and values. And I think really in any organisation true to itself has got to constantly measure itself in terms of, well, are we progressing towards our stated vision? Are we doing everything, or does everything that we do contribute to our sense of mission? And is it on the basis of our values? And then I think you've got another factor inside, and that's this notion of esprit de corps or team motivation. Is there genuine enthusiasm within the organisation? Are we up? Do we believe that what we're doing is important? Do we believe that this work environment in which we're doing that is healthy for the individual and the team and the organisation overall? So, you know, from the very objective financial or regulatory requirement all the way through to internal esprit de corps and customer satisfaction, I think there's quite a range of criteria. In a sense, it's the same criteria, but slightly different in every different industry context. And I think you've got to think right across those. And if you've got good governance, a good board or a good council, that's the type of thing they're focusing on. They're trying to make sure that the CEO and the leadership team and the members of the organisation understand, are aware of, and are focused on these outcomes.
Yeah, that's so important. And if someone who has been through or has graduated from your organisation, I can definitely attest to those values. It was a wonderful place to be learning. So thank you for all of the work that you and your team are putting into that.
Thanks, Matthew. That's good to hear, because that's always your vulnerability as an educational institution. Yeah. In the end, there's only one thing that matters. Students feel like they've learned something, and they've learned it in a helpful, supportive environment.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a bit of a more sort of broader question. What do you think, or do you think that initiating change or sustainable change is a challenge for educational organisations, or do you think that how are some of the ways that we may initiate change respectfully?
Yeah, well, number one, I would say that the thing that distinguishes leadership from any other function in an organisation is the enacting of change. And in the end, you know, if you want to distinguish between leadership and management or leadership and pastoral ministry, it's leadership is always committed to change on the basis that even though we're happy with the present, there's a better way of doing this, there's a better future there. So we need to be pursuing that. So I think that's leadership in any organisation. And good leadership is always very change focused. In education, it's I don't know, it's the most regulated industry in the world, but it's close to it. So the problem you got there is, if you let the regulation dominate, then you develop a compliance mentality. And basically all you want to do is do the same thing over and over again each year. Hopefully do it a little bit better, you know, be more efficient or more effective. But do it better. Well, I think that's a mistake, because the world keeps on changing. And one thing the COVID lockdown did in Australia and right around the world is it absolutely shook every educational institution and said, well, you better take the online learning environment seriously. And so suddenly everyone had to prop and move to something, and then find out that it's not as bad as others have been saying. And it doesn't necessarily diminish or devalue the educational experience. So a crisis has enacted significant innovation in Australian higher education. Now, I will say of us that we were committed to that way before that. In fact, we started education with cassette tapes in a box way back in 1990, a long time ago. And we were early adopters of online education, and indeed of trying to develop pedagogy, you know, a theory of learning that's more appropriate to an online learning environment. So it's actually a challenge in a regulated environment to maintain an innovative, a change-focused outlook. And I think in the way you do your staffing, like for me, I say, well, my job is to keep the organisation moving toward the future. My job is to try and think at the level of strategy, to try and rise above all of the internal issues. And I've got incredibly good staff who deal with all the compliance. I try to avoid it, because if I get myself into a compliance mentality, I know what that will do. It will take over my mentality. I won't have any opportunity to essentially give the organisation the chance of the future. So maybe the most basic thing I would say there, Matthew, is in an educational environment, in a heavily regulated environment, just differentiate your staff between those who love and who are good at all the compliance required to maintain operation, and then separate those whose job it is to be involved in strategic thinking, long-range thinking, problem solving, looking around for new ideas. You try and separate those things. So I think it's almost impossible for the one person to do both of those things.
Absolutely. And Stephen, this is not a question that I submitted to you before, so feel free to loop back to it. But obviously, the responsibility, a leader's main job is to take responsibility. So if there are issues with compliance, if there are challenges that are not addressed with your organisation, how do you make sure that you both identify those issues, but also effectively delegate them to people beneath you? And what are some of those conversations that you have with people to make sure that those standards are maintained?
Well, you need pretty rigorous processes in an organisation. In any environment, any organisation wants to survive needs pretty rigorous processes, but certainly in an educational environment. So, like if I use us as a model, and we're no different to any other education institution, there's an academic board whose job is policy, academic policy. Underneath that, there are any number of committees that focus on learning and teaching, or research, or student welfare, numerous things. And those committees are tasked with essentially compliance regulation tasks to ensure that we conform to this criteria. The academic board, its job, it sits there to make sure that we do indeed adhere to the policy framework that we've committed ourselves to. And then the academic board reports to the council, the governing body of the organisation, which is another forum for assessing rigour, strength, success. So it's policies, it's being well enough staffed, having clear enough focal points within the organisation, understanding what are the critical compliance or quality assurance foci in regard to your particular operation, and then having someone responsible for every one of those things. So in the end, I would say rigorous processes. Being visionary is no excuse for not having rigorous processes. In fact, visionary people without rigorous processes, it's a disaster.
Absolutely. Do you think it's obviously really important to have trust in the people that you're working with, and understanding of their competencies and their strengths and their areas of expertise? What do you think, more of a personal question, what do you think your greatest strength as a leader is?
I think, look, I think I'm very good at long range thinking. I think I'm quite good strategically as a leader. I think I'm very aware of the need to present an appropriate role model within the organisation. I am not a micromanager at all. So I employ competent staff, and then I give them a great deal of freedom to pursue the objectives required. So I think I do those things well. I'd say I'm quite a relational leader.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your honesty. I think it takes a very self-aware leader to reflect on their leadership capabilities. I really do appreciate it. Just a couple more questions, Stephen. I'm aware of your time. I just wondered what currently has your attention. What sort of big problem are you trying to work out in your organisation?
Two or three. Number one, we're trying to advance as an institution. We want to become a university, and far more easily said than done. So, number one, I'm very, very focused on the steps we have to take from where we are at this moment in time, which is a self-accrediting higher education provider, to become a university. So incredibly focused on the need to enhance internal processes, possibly to enhance some of our staffing profiles. And and to make the appropriate applications to government. So focus very much on that. Related to that is the need for us to develop our financial strength. Education is not a profitable industry. I know tuition fees seem high, but by the time you pay all your bills, there's not much margin on tuition fees. So we've got to generate benevolent income, donor income. So very focused on building a strong donation program to the college, and hopefully before I leave, that will have produced at least an endowment of some sort, 20, 30, $100 million undergirding the college, because financial strength is key to successful educational institutions. Yeah. So I reckon they're my two main things out of that. Maintaining a really coherent and functional executive team is important. In fact, that's become a significant part of my focus over the last 2 years. So I take my executive team away 3 times a year now, overnight or over a couple of nights, and we really just focus on the big picture. We leave all the details back in the college, and we talk about vision and mission and values and strategy, and we contemplate whether there are some new opportunities for us. So I think that's a really important thing. So and then maybe the last thing I'd say is constituency development. In an educational institution, the CEO's job, I think, is to make sure there's a supportive constituency, a community who trusts that organisation, and then on the basis of that broad community of trust to elicit donations toward the organisation, and indeed references and recommendations toward the organisation. So I think they're the things driving me personally. My wife and I have got 5 grandkids, 3 married children.
I thought I was busy, but obviously.
Yeah, so that's a big focus in our life, and we don't want to neglect family for the sake of the organisation. So it's an increasing focal point for us, trying to make sure we're there as grandparents. We're not the parents. We don't have to be the centre of the grandkids' life, but might be an adjunct and an important part of their life. So it's a big emphasis for us. Yeah.
Sounds like I think the grandparent role is such an important role. You have done your time as parents, and so you can enjoy all of the blessings of being grandparents. It's wonderful to hear. I'm just curious, Stephen, what are you most proud of in terms of your leadership over the past decade or so? What thing really stands out to you, and what do you?
Well, I think I'll be most proud of the fact that we've got a really high quality staff, and I think I've chosen every one of them at the upper levels. So I think the team that I've assembled,
fantastic,
brilliant. Yeah, that'd be my main, the thing I'm most proud of. Obviously, connected to that, we've had a great 10 years as an organisation, grown rapidly by any measure. So that's good. But we've only done that because of the quality of the people and the team that I've got assembled around me. So that's my main achievement.
Amazing. Well, one sort of final question, Stephen. Where can people find out more about you? I'm always amazed at the articles and the publications that you write, and how on earth you get time to do that. But where can people find out more about your incredible work?
Yeah, there's 2 websites. I need to remember the name of them. But one's called Transforming Leadership. Maybe transforming.leadership.com, I think. That's one. And the other one is Stephen Fogarty.com. So there's 2 websites up there, one with my name in it and one with Transforming Leadership in it. If you jump in there, there's a plethora of resources that may be helpful. Yeah.
There sure is. And I'll make sure, Stephen, that they get put in the show notes so people can be directed to those wonderful resources. But I just wanted to say, on a personal level, thank you so much for your leadership that has had indirectly had a huge impact on my life. The work that you're doing is truly transformational. And it's really wonderful to see the legacy that you're building in your organisation. So I can't thank you enough for your time, and thank you for everything that you are contributing to the leadership space. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Delight to be with you, and God bless your efforts and make you successful.
Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the Art of Teaching podcast today. I hope that you, like me, got some valuable insights out of our discussion. For show notes, please visit theartofteachingpodcast.com. I've one favour to ask. If you could please head to the iTunes page of the podcast and rate and review the episode. This would really help to get the interviews and resources to as many people as possible. Also, I've created a private Facebook group so that we can continue the discussion after each episode. The link is in the show notes. Thank you again for listening, and until next time.